Thank you very much for joining us here, Governor Weld. So last night I watched the whole town hall on Chris Matthews hardball in University of New Hampshire. Today you're at Temple University. It seems that the campaign is really trying to court millennials right now. Do you see them as the base you can build off of the most right now?
They're certainly a base. I mean, there's 75 million millennials between the ages of 18 and 34. They're the largest voting bloc. They've just overtaken my block of the baby boomers. You know, I think they're attracted to the core idea of the Libertarian Party, which is maximum freedom and liberty in your personal lives. I see that a lot when I'm hiring young people for both my law firm and my business. They're really not quite so focused on what their opening salary is going to be as upon their own ability to make their own decisions about work-life balance and every other decision that's their own decision. So that's probably the basis for the attraction, among other things. On the budget questions, you know, Gary and I argued that we're fighting to reform them to save them for the millennials so that they'll be there. I think that's particularly true of Social Security. If nothing's done about Social Security, it's absolutely not going to be there for the current millennial generation.
And you mentioned the budget. You said you'd take kind of a zero budget approach to it, you know, start everything at zero.
Yeah.
And that you would actually end up reducing the deficit within your first 100 days is what you said.
Well, we said we'd file a balanced budget within 100 days. And a balanced budget means with no borrowing in it. And that's not the budget that gets filed in Washington every year. The budget that gets filed in Washington every year sharply increases the deficit because it provides for borrowing to get the funds necessary to pay all the accounts. And that we know we can do. It doesn't mean Congress is going to pass it right away. You know, we got a partner there called Congress. But I think having the executive come in and say, okay, here's a balanced budget, that would get everybody's heads turned around because it never happens in Washington. They say, you know, if there's not a 5% increase in every single account, people start screaming bloody murder in Washington because all they care about is pandering to their constituents so they can get reelected.
Governor Weld, you were really active on Twitter the night of the debate between Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump, and one tweet specifically stuck out to me as Donald Trump seemed to keep interjecting with Secretary Clinton during her answers, and you tweeted, "Mrs. Clinton is correct that jobs went up when Bill Clinton was president. That's why Mr. Trump is interrupting. Why do you believe jobs went up when Bill Clinton was president?"
Oh, I thought we had a good economy when Clinton was president. Are you telling me that's not the case?
No, I'm asking why do you think jobs went up during President
I
Clinton's
was
administration?
paying close attention to what happened when he was president. I mean, I worked with him on passing the North American Free Trade Association, and he actually ran surpluses for some of his time as president. He may be the last guy who did so. So I thought, despite being a Democrat and I was a Republican then, I thought he was a fine president.
A lot of people that I've been talking to say that there may be one holdout with your campaign. You touched on it a little bit upstairs. They keep bringing up the incident with Aleppo, and then they brought up last night they were watching the forum, and when Governor Johnson was pressed about what foreign leader he most admired, he said, you know, he couldn't come up with a name. He said the former president of Mexico, and he followed up with which one. You know, how do you communicate to people that he knows what he's talking about?
Well, I mean, tap dancing on television is not his long suit, you know, or what I called it in the other room, the pop quiz on television. On the other hand, I've had a lot of long conversations with him when we were just starting out about what are we going to do, what are our priorities, what do we think about fiscal policy, what do we think about social issues, what do we think about what to do if we get to Washington. And he's kind of a deep thinker, and he comes up with ideas that are different than the received wisdom, and one of them happens to coincide with mine, and that's about how to get a balanced budget. You know, my first year in Massachusetts, we cut the budget in real dollars, so there were fewer dollars in year 2 than there were in year 1. And Massachusetts was in a deep recession at that point, but still, that engendered confidence on the part of the rating agencies, so our bond rating went up, so we paid less in interest, and people started adding jobs, and wound up being a good thing. On the Aleppo issue where Governor Johnson didn't identify the place name, you know, I think identifying the place name is probably less important than having the correct policy. And Gary cares a lot about the human dimensions of sending people over to be put in harm's way. And that's why he's so frustrated with himself for causing all the publicity about Aleppo by not remembering the place name. But he's frustrated because he doesn't believe the policy is right that the U.S. has had in arming the rebels and just pouring force after force in there. He and I both think, for example, there's an issue now on the table, should the 8,400 troops in Afghanistan come home? And we say yes and hell yes. And the argument against bringing them home is that then all the people who collaborated with us against the Taliban would be slaughtered. Okay, but that's going to be true in 20 years. So, if 250 families have to be brought to the United States under an asylum program, fine. Let's just do it now rather than later. I mean, many empires have come a cropper in Afghanistan, starting with the British and then the Soviets, and we should have learned that that's not a great play. A land war in Asia or Africa is not a great play.
Last night during the forum, you mentioned yourself and Governor Johnson talked about national security, as you just mentioned in your previous answer. And we had the opportunity to actually interview Robert Costa of the Washington Post just last week. And in your speech today, you talked about the Republican Party, if not this year, you said in 2020 you think there will be a split. And you referenced, what was it, the Know-Nothing Party.
Split up with the Whigs in the 1850s. Yeah.
And when we talked to Robert Costa, we asked about Trumpism. He wrote that he thinks Trumpism will live on even if Donald Trump doesn't win the presidency. Do you think Donald Trump is the reason the Republican Party is going to split, or do you think this was a long time coming?
I think Donald Trump is certainly the spark. And I also think, and my Democratic friends don't like to hear this, but I think that those voters that Donald Trump brought in to the Republican Party, some of them were Reagan Democrats. I think they're going to stay in the Republican Party because the Democratic Party is just too fancy for them. And I'm more sure of that than I am that the Republican Party is going to split. But those people who Donald Trump has succeeded in causing to become infuriated, they are not going to go back to the Chablis and what do people eat with Chablis? Chablis and Brie. They're not going to go back to the party of Chablis and Brie.
You mentioned upstairs that now, instead of having an R on your forehead, you have an L, and that you feel free at last. Talk a little bit about that and how you think that could actually help Washington if you and Gary Johnson make it there.
Well, I mean, I ran as a Republican all those years, but I never believed a bit of what the Republican Party said about social issues. I mean, they were anti-choice on abortion. They were borderline hostile to gay and lesbian civil rights. I was out there by myself for the entire decade of the 1990s on gay and lesbian civil rights and marriage equality. And I appointed the woman who wrote the judicial opinion holding that marriage equality for gays and lesbians is constitutionally compelled under both the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause, and proud that I did. But that's not the platform of the Republican Party. If you remember, they got to Cleveland and the platform committee said, how can we make this platform more mean-spirited than it already is on social issues? And they did. They moved it further to the right. So that's why I say I feel free at last. I'm not apologizing for half of my party's platform. We got, Gary and I still have issues to talk through, but, we're perfectly open about that we don't agree about absolutely everything. But what we do agree on is that we are the nominees and we're declaring what libertarians stand for in this cycle, not some phrase that may be in a document called the Libertarian Platform. Same principle as the Republican platform. If you read the entire Republican platform, it would make your hair stand on end.
Do you believe race relations have gotten worse during the Obama administration?
Boy, I hope not. We sure have had a rash of these shootings, but certainly not Mr. Obama's fault. I mean, if I was to second guess anything there, it would be Mr. Trump trying to stir everybody up and get everybody angry at each other.
Since you bring up Mr. Trump, and I saw, again, you live tweeted the whole debate, what was the most appalling comment from either Secretary Clinton or Donald Trump during that debate?
I thought the worst was when he once again tried to say that Mrs. Clinton started the birther movement. Said she started it and I'm ending it here. Obviously, his staff had told him he's got to get off the birther issue. He said, I'm ending it, but she started it. That's a complete lie. He doesn't care.
Let's talk a little bit about education. Here in Philadelphia, the school district of Philadelphia has a deficit of $765 million. They're closing schools left and right. Some classrooms, upwards of 70 students in there at a time because they can no longer find teachers.
70 to a class?
Yeah,
Oh, my dear.
yeah. They,
Oh, my dear.
they've-
18 is okay, 30 is way too many.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
They outsource the substitute teaching program. They can't get subs to fill the spots here in the school district. You
Why
mentioned
not?
upstairs.
Conditions?
I
Working conditions, or?
I presume nobody
Maybe-
wants.
Maybe pay, but if
Yeah.
there's 70 students in the class, you don't want to be a substitute teacher.
Upstairs, you talked about how in Massachusetts you implemented high stakes testing, and you think it could have a positive impact if implemented nationwide, and not just ushering students through grades just because they checked
Yeah.
off all the requirements. Do you think that could actually help situations here like Philadelphia, high stakes
Well, I
testing?
do, and to tell you the full story of that education bill that was passed in 93 or 94, there was a trade-off involved there. Our economy had started to recover sharply as a result of the fiscal steps we'd taken, so we had some spare cash. And I was aware that there was a huge disparity in spending per pupil in various districts for the public schools. So Wellesley and Weston would spend, I don't know, I'm making this figure up, $25,000 a pupil, and inner city might be 8. It was that ratio. I'm not sure those are the exact figures. So I put a bunch of money in the bill for lower performing districts. And that's what the teachers got out of it. And they didn't like 30 people in a class any more than I did, because I knew what it did to learning. So we tried to get it down to 18, and I think we put so much money in the bill that we got quite close to that. But that took money.
And did it ultimately help things? And you think
We
it could help
went
minority communities?
Starting 3 years after that, which is when you could see the results of the test, Massachusetts went to #1 in reading and math and stayed there every single year since, until 2 years ago, which is the last time I looked. They may still be #1.